Beeping was the only sound I remember. Not voices, not footsteps, not my son's voice saying, "Mom, I'm here," just that steady mechanical beep over and over, like a metronome counting out the seconds I'd been alone. I didn't know where I was at first. I thought I was dreaming. The ceiling was white and unfamiliar, the light too harsh, and there was something on my finger, a clip, cold plastic, and tubes running along my arm. I tried to move and couldn't. My chest felt like someone had parked a car on it overnight. Then I heard a voice. "She's awake. Can someone get the nurse?" It wasn't my son's voice. It was my neighbor, Faye. Faye, who I'd known for 11 years. Faye, who brought me tomatoes from her garden every August. Faye, who had no reason in the world to be sitting in a hospital chair next to my bed. I looked at the clock on the wall, 2:14 in the afternoon on a Wednesday. Faye? My voice came out wrong, scraped and thin. She stood up immediately and took my hand. Her eyes were red. She'd been crying, or she hadn't slept, or both. "You're okay," she said. "You're okay. Don't try to sit up." I didn't try to sit up. I just looked at her and tried to understand where I was and how I got there and why it was her holding my hand and not my son. I need to back up, because none of this makes sense without the before. My name is June. I'm 67 years old. I live in Raleigh, North Carolina, in the same house I've lived in for 22 years. The one my late husband Harold and I bought when our son was 8 years old, and the neighborhood still had more trees than houses. Harold passed 6 years ago. Prostate cancer. It was fast in the end, which the doctors said was a mercy, though I'm not sure mercy is the right word for watching someone you love disappear in 4 months. After Harold died, it was just me and the house and the routine I built around keeping myself from falling apart. Morning coffee on the back porch. Church on Sundays. A part-time job at the public library 2 days a week, mostly because it got me out of the house and around people who talked about books instead of asking me how I was really doing. My son. I'll call him my son because that's what he is. Whatever else is true about him is 34. His name is Brendan. He lives about 40 minutes away with his girlfriend, Cassie, and their dog. He has a good job in IT. He calls me on birthdays and at Christmas. He comes for Thanksgiving usually, though the last 2 years he'd gone to Cassie's parents instead and sent me a grocery store pie in a cardboard box with a post-it note that said, "Thinking of you, Mom. I want to be fair. I want to tell this the right way. Brendan isn't a bad person. I don't think he ever set out to be the kind of son who doesn't show up. I think he just drifted, got busy, got comfortable, stopped thinking about what I might need because I never asked for anything, and somewhere along the way that became permission to forget I might need something at all. I told myself that was normal. I told myself lots of things. It was a Sunday morning in March. I'd been at church, Grace Lutheran, the one on Glenwood Avenue that Harold and I had attended for over 20 years. The sermon was about perseverance. I remember that. I remember thinking that the pastor's tie was the same color as the carpet, and then I remember standing up for the closing hymn and feeling something shift in my chest. Not pain exactly, more like pressure, like the air in the room had gotten heavier all at once and was pressing down on my sternum from the inside. I sat back down. The woman next to me, Bev, from the women's Bible study group, asked if I was all right. I said I was fine. I said I just needed a moment. I did not get a moment. The next thing I remember is the ceiling of the church, which is high and vaulted and painted pale gold, and Bev's face looking down at me saying my name over and over, and someone else saying call 911, and someone else saying call 911, and someone else saying give her room, give her room. I had a heart attack. Right there in the third pew from the front, on a Sunday morning in March, with the closing hymn still ringing in the air. The paramedics came. I was conscious enough to answer some questions in the ambulance, and then I wasn't conscious anymore. What I know from the gap is what the doctors and Faye told me later. The hospital called Brendan 31 times. 31. I'm not guessing at that number. It's in the hospital's records. I've seen it myself. The attending physician tried Brendan's number repeatedly for the first 4 hours, left 2 voicemails, sent a text from the hospital system. Then a nurse tried, then the social worker on duty tried. 31 calls over the course of the day. My son answered on the 32nd call. What he said was, "I can't really deal with this right now. She has a neighbor. Call the neighbor." Then he hung up. The social worker sat with that for a moment. Then she found Faye's number through my phone. I'd been brought in with my purse and called her instead. Faye was in my driveway in 12 minutes. She stayed at the hospital for the next 3 days while I was in the ICU. My son did not come. When I fully understood what had happened, when Faye sat next to my bed and walked me through it gently, the way you tell someone something that would change how they see the world, I didn't cry right away. I just lay there and thought, I knew. I think I always knew. Not that he'd do this exactly. Not this. But I'd known for a long time that I was lower on his list than I pretended not to notice. I'd known when the Thanksgiving pies started coming by delivery instead of in his hands. I'd known when he stopped asking about my health after my blood pressure diagnosis 2 years ago. I'd known when I called him in November to say I'd been having chest pains, and he said, "You should really make a doctor's appointment, Mom," and then changed the subject to something Cassie's family was doing for the holidays. I had made a doctor's appointment. The doctor told me to watch my stress levels and come back in 6 weeks. I went back twice, alone both times. Faye knew about all of it. Faye knew because she paid attention. She'd been driving me to those follow-up appointments because my car was in the shop the first time, and after that it became a habit. Her driving and us stopping for coffee after at the Panera on Crabtree Valley Avenue and talking for an hour. She knew my blood pressure numbers. She knew the name of my cardiologist. She knew I hadn't told Brendan how worried I was because I didn't want to be a burden. "You have never been a burden," she said to me in that hospital room 3 days after my heart attack, while I was still trying to understand the shape of what had happened. "You have never asked for one single thing you didn't need." I looked at her and thought, this woman has sat beside my bed for 3 days. She went home to feed her cats and came back. She brought me a cardigan from my house because she knew the hospital blankets were thin. She knows my cardiologist's name, and my son does not. What do you do with that? What do you do when the love you find isn't where you planted it? I was in the hospital for 8 days total. The surgery. They put in a stent, a small procedure as these things go, went well. The recovery was uncomfortable but uncomplicated. I had to stay for observation, for adjustments to my medication, for the cardiologist to be satisfied. During those 8 days, Brendan called once. It was on day 5. I'd been moved out of the ICU to a regular room. My phone was charged and beside me on the tray table. He called at 7 p.m. on a Tuesday, and I let it ring twice before I answered, because I needed those 2 rings to decide what kind of conversation I was going to have. "Hey, Mom," he sounded, I don't know, normal, the way he sounds when he calls on my birthday. Casual, like someone checking an item off a list. "How are you doing?" "Faye said you're out of the ICU." So he talked to Faye. He'd gotten his updates through my neighbor rather than calling the hospital himself. "I'm doing okay," I said. "It was a heart attack. They put in a stent. I'll be here a few more days." "Oh, that's good. That the stent thing went well, I mean." A pause. I heard the television in the background, something with a laugh track. "Cassie and I were thinking we might come by next weekend, once you're home. Bring you some food or whatever." Next weekend. I'd had a heart attack and emergency surgery, and my son was planning a visit next weekend. "Okay," I said. "Cool. Feel better, okay? The doctors there seem to know what they're doing." He didn't ask what caused it. He didn't ask if I was scared. He didn't ask who had been with me, or whether I'd been alone when it happened, or what the next weeks would look like in terms of recovery. He said, "Feel better," like I had a cold. I told him I'd let him know when I was home. Then I put the phone down on the tray table and looked at the ceiling for a long time. Faye brought me chamomile tea from the little cafe cart in the lobby an hour later and sat with me while I drank it. She didn't ask how the call went. She could probably tell from my face. I came home to a house Faye had prepared. She'd stocked my refrigerator, not just with groceries, but with actual meals, things she'd cooked herself and labeled and dated in the freezer. Chicken soup, a casserole, rice with vegetables. She'd put fresh sheets on my bed. She'd left a notepad on the kitchen counter with all my follow-up appointment dates written out in her neat handwriting, along with the names of the doctors and the pharmacy's phone number and her own cell number with "call me anytime, I mean it" written underneath. I stood in my kitchen and held that notepad, and I cried for the first time since the hospital. Not from sadness exactly, or not only from sadness. I cried because someone had done this for me, because someone had looked at what I needed and simply done it. Without being asked, without needing to be thanked, without making it about anything other than the fact that I needed help and she could give it. Brendan and Cassie came the following Saturday. They brought a fruit basket, the cellophane-wrapped kind from the grocery store with that fake green plastic grass underneath, and a card that Cassie had clearly picked out and addressed, and probably also signed. Brendan sat on my couch for an hour and a half and talked mostly about his work and a hiking trip they were planning for the summer. He asked me how I was feeling in the abstract way people ask when they don't actually want the answer to be long. I looked at my son sitting on my couch and I tried to find the thing I'd been trying to hold on to for years. The idea that he was just busy, just distracted, just not yet grown into the person he would eventually be. And I couldn't find it. It was gone. Not with anger. With something quieter than anger. With the exhausted recognition of a thing that has been true for a long time and that you have been spending too much energy pretending isn't. After they left, I sat in the kitchen for a while. Then I called my attorney. I should tell you about the will. Harold and I had updated our wills when he was diagnosed. We'd left everything to each other. And after Harold passed, I had an appointment scheduled to update mine to leave everything to Brendan. The house, the retirement accounts, Harold's life insurance, which I'd never touched, sitting in a savings account at Wells Fargo. I hadn't made that appointment yet. I'd been meaning to. It was on my list. I just hadn't gotten there. My attorney's name is Gail. She's been practicing estate law in Raleigh for 30 years. I called her the week after I came home from the hospital and made an appointment for the following Thursday. Faye drove me because my cardiologist wanted me to avoid driving for another 2 weeks. Gail and I sat in her office for almost 2 hours. I told her everything. Not as a client telling her attorney, but the way you talk to someone who's seen you through hard things before. Gail had handled Harold's estate. She knew our family. She knew what I'd been through. She listened without interrupting. When I was done, she said, "What do you want to do?" I told her. I wanted to leave the house to Faye. Not everything. I wasn't disinheriting my son out of spite. I want to be clear about that. Brendan would still receive Harold's life insurance, a sum that would be significant by any measure. He would not be left with nothing, but the house, the one Harold and I bought and paid for over 30 years, the one I'd been maintaining alone for 6 years, the one my neighbor had driven me home from the hospital to and restocked my refrigerator. In that was going to Faye, along with half of my personal savings. Gail drew up the paperwork. I signed it. I left her office feeling, for the first time in a long time, like I was seeing clearly. 3 weeks later, Brendan called. I'd mentioned to him, casually, during a brief phone call the week before, that I'd been to see my attorney and updated some things. I hadn't said what. I hadn't needed to. But Brendan has always been good at reading between lines when money is involved. He called on a Sunday evening. His voice was different from the fruit basket Saturday visit. Tighter. The casual ease was gone. "Mom, what did you change in your will?" I looked out the kitchen window at Faye's house across the street. Her porch light was on. She was probably reading. She reads every evening. "I made some updates," I said, "to reflect the people who have actually shown up in my life." There was a long silence. "What does that mean?" "It means what it sounds like, Brendan." "Mom, He stopped, started again. "I was going to come. When you were in the hospital. It was a really bad week, and Cassie and I were going through some stuff, and I thought you had people with you." "I did," I said. "My neighbor, who stayed for 3 days, who cooked for me and drove me to appointments and stocked my refrigerator." "Mom, the hospital called you 31 times. Another silence. "Longer, I know," he said, and something in his voice shifted. For a moment, I thought he might actually say something real. "I know. I'm sorry. I handled it badly. I know that." "I know you know," I said. "I believe you're sorry. I do, but sorry is for afterward. What I needed was before and during, and you weren't there." He didn't have an answer for that. We talked for a little longer. I wasn't cold. I didn't want to be cruel. But I didn't change my mind, and I told him so plainly. I told him I loved him. I told him he would be provided for. I told him the house was going to someone who had treated it like it mattered. When I hung up, I realized my hands weren't shaking. That was new. My hands used to shake after hard conversations with Brendan, with the effort of managing his feelings and my own at the same time. This time, they were still. I sat with that for a moment. Then I made myself a cup of tea and went out to the back porch. In April, I booked a trip. It had been 6 years since I'd traveled anywhere. Harold and I had always talked about going to Savannah, the architecture, the Spanish moss, the squares. We'd never made it while he was alive. After he died, I couldn't face going to places we'd planned to go together. I booked a long weekend at a bed and breakfast in Savannah's historic district, a room with a 4-poster bed and a clawfoot tub and breakfast served in a courtyard with hanging ferns. Faye came with me. We drove down on a Friday morning, windows down because the weather was perfect, talking the whole way about nothing important, her cats, my garden, a book we'd both read, the way the dogwoods were blooming along I-40. We ate dinner at a restaurant on the river and split a bottle of wine and talked about Harold and about Faye's late husband, Robert, who had died 8 years ago, and about getting older and losing people and figuring out what you're still doing here. We walked through Forsyth Park the next morning. The fountain was running. The azaleas were out, all shades of pink and purple, the kind of color that feels like an argument against despair. I took a picture and didn't post it anywhere. I just kept it for myself. That night, back at the bed and breakfast, I sat on the little wrought iron balcony and looked out at the street below. The old cobblestones, the live oaks draped in moss, the gas lamps starting to come on as the sky went dark, and I thought about the hospital ceiling, the beeping, the face that was waiting when I woke up. I thought about how long I'd spent tending a relationship that was mostly me doing the tending, watering something that had long since stopped growing, telling myself it was love when really it was just hope, wearing love's face. I thought about Faye in the next room, reading with the lamp on. I thought about what it cost me to almost die before I figured out which direction the love actually ran. I don't want to end this with a tidy lesson. Life doesn't really work that way, and anyone who's lived long enough knows it. Brendan and I are still in contact. We talk on the phone sometimes, shorter calls than before, and there's a distance between us that I think will always be there now, not because of the will, but because of the 31 calls, because of "I can't really deal with this right now," said to a social worker while his mother was in surgery. Some things change the shape of a relationship permanently, not by force, just by truth. What I know now, what I've been slowly learning since I came home from that hospital with Faye's chicken soup in my freezer and her handwriting on my notepad, is that family is not a fixed category. It is not automatically the people who share your blood or your last name or your memories of Christmas mornings. It is the people who show up, who stay, who know your cardiologist's name and drive you to appointments and sleep in a hospital chair because they cannot stand the thought of you waking up alone. I am 67 years old. I have a stent in my heart and a garden that needs tending and a trip to Charleston. I'm already planning for the fall. I have a son who is learning, slowly and perhaps too late, what it means to have a mother. And I have Faye across the street with her porch light on. That is not nothing. That is, I think, most of it. My cardiologist says my heart is strong. He says the stent is doing exactly what it should. He says there's no reason, with the right care and the right habits and a little luck, that I shouldn't have many good years ahead of me. I intend to use them. I've been thinking about what it actually means to earn something. Not money, not a title. I mean the quieter things. Trust, presence, a place in someone's life that holds when things get hard. You don't get those by showing up once in a while with a grocery store fruit basket and good intentions. You get them the way Faye got them, one appointment at a time, one cup of coffee after the cardiologist, one morning showing up to a hospital when nobody asked you to. What happened to me wasn't random. I don't mean that in any mystical sense. I just mean that the way things turned out was the direct result of choices, a long sequence of choices made over years by everyone involved. Brendan chose again and again to treat my needs as something that could wait. He chose the easy call over the hard one, the fruit basket over the flight, the casual feel better over actually being there. And I made my own choices too. I chose to minimize, to not ask, to tell myself it was fine when it wasn't. We both built the distance between us. I just didn't see how wide it had gotten until I woke up in a hospital bed and the face looking back at me wasn't his. That's the thing about consequences. They don't announce themselves. They accumulate quietly in the background while you're busy explaining them away, and then one day the accounting comes due, and the numbers are exactly what they should be, given everything that was deposited and everything that was withdrawn. Faye didn't do what she did because she expected anything back. That's what I keep coming back to. She drove me to appointments and stocked my refrigerator and slept in that chair because she is the kind of person who does those things, because she has spent her whole life building the habit of showing up, and that habit doesn't turn off when it gets inconvenient. That's what integrity actually looks like in practice. Not the big dramatic gesture, the small, consistent, unglamorous showing up. I think about the woman I was a year ago, the one who was quietly lonely and pretending she wasn't, who had chest pains she downplayed to her son because she didn't want to be a burden, who had convinced herself that half a relationship was better than the grief of seeing it clearly. I was not a stupid woman. I was a woman who had confused endurance with wisdom. I had mistaken my ability to absorb disappointment for strength, when really it was just a way of protecting myself from a truth I wasn't ready to face. What took me almost dying to understand is that real strength is not how much you can quietly absorb. It's how clearly you can see, and how honestly you can act on what you see, even when it costs you something. I changed my will not out of bitterness. I changed it because it was the most honest thing I could do. It was me finally letting the ledger reflect reality instead of hope. Brendan will be provided for. He is still my son, and I still love him in the complicated, permanent way that doesn't require his behavior to be different in order to continue existing. But love is not the same as reward, and presence, real, sustained, costly presence, is worth something. It deserved to be recognized. I have a full life ahead of me. I know that now in a way I didn't before. I intend to live it with people who know my cardiologist's name.